What's going on, everybody? It's Brendan Abbott coming to you with the KBR Sports Podcast. You already know, the best sports podcast of your 24-hour day. I'm glad to be back with you guys after about a few weeks off, actually. I took a trip back home and was enjoying the relaxation time, a time to take a break with family and friends and everything like that. It definitely was much needed, and it felt like a bit of restoration, honestly, and just getting back in the groove of things and getting to see people I haven't seen in almost a year, essentially, and then just also getting to see family as well that I hadn't seen in forever. So that was great, and just getting a chance to free your mind from certain things. I think that's very important. Everybody does that in a lot of instances, but I don't think we sometimes afford ourselves those luxuries of being able to just say, hey, let me step back from the daily grind and the daily focus of having your mind locked in on a certain goal and stuff like that. Not that you ever want to forget that goal, but there is important times where you do need to step aside from it, so that way you can take a break and then focus in after the break and go after that goal even harder once you've taken a second to revamp yourself. So hopefully everybody enjoyed themselves over the holidays and wasn't missing the KBR Sports Podcast all too badly throughout that time period. So definitely happy to be back on with you guys now. If you guys already haven't, make sure you guys go and follow the KBR Sports Podcast and subscribe on Rabble, Spreaker, YouTube, iTunes, and SoundCloud. That way you guys will get notifications whenever the KBR Sports Podcast is streaming live and when a new episode is posted. Also, make sure you follow the KBR Sports Twitter page at KBR_sports, where you tweet about different sports events that are going on, and even sometimes the KBR Sports topics that are going to be on each podcast episode, as well as my own Twitter page at Brendan, which is ABBANBRENDAN, where I talk about my different thoughts on different sports events that are going on, such as the game last night between Clemson and Alabama, which I'm going to get into in a second. But most importantly, guys, don't forget to also comment, like, and share the KBR Sports Podcast. That way, obviously, you're showing your support for the podcast, and so that way I can get your opinions and feedback on any episode or any opinion that I might have. So that way I can kind of gauge like what you guys feel, the general sense and feel of something I might say is, and whether I agree or disagree, it can be a conversation about it, whether it's in the comments or something like that. So definitely make sure you don't forget to comment, like, and obviously share the podcast. But like I alluded to earlier, I wanted to jump into talking about the National Championship game, because I think it was a game that ended up turning out in a way that a lot of people didn't expect. A lot of people were so thrown off by the fact that it was a blowout. I mean, Alabama got their arses handed to them, and it was a situation where you look back and you're just wondering, like, how did we go from a situation where we felt like the two teams were on an equal playing field to all of a sudden feeling like Clemson is overwhelmingly better than Alabama? And when you're watching the game, you're looking at the true freshman Trevor Lawrence, and you're just amazed at how well he played in the game, and you truly have to respect just how well and how smart the Clemson coaching staff was to really be willing to make such a decision. And everybody was talking about earlier in the year about how it really took guts, and it does take guts to essentially bench the quarterback that got you to where you were last year, and benching Kelly Bryant and deciding to go with Trevor Lawrence, who was a freshman, and he didn't disappoint them at all. I mean, they're the first team to go 15-0 in the college football history, and you look at Trevor Lawrence. I mean, throughout the game, he was 20 of 32. He completely outplayed Tua from Alabama, and I mean, he was 20 of 32 passing, threw for 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, had a 92.8 QBR. It was an all-around just great performance from him. So you couldn't help but be impressed by how the young guy stepped up in the moments when they needed him to step up. And some of the throws he was making, I mean, they were just exceptional. I mean, I was looking, I'm like, yo, who is this guy? I was, because I will say, I'm not gonna lie, and trying to see people out, like, I've watched Clemson all year. Like, I knew about Trevor Lawrence, and I knew the storyline behind Trevor Lawrence, but I wasn't sitting down watching every single Clemson game to kind of get a gauge of how good Trevor Lawrence was. No, that's not what I was doing. But now when I'm seeing him in the biggest game, and this guy's making, like, on point throws, spot on throws, and like his throws are like marksman throws. I'm like there were hardly any throws in there. I was like, oh, he missed that throw, or that was a bad pass, or something like that. There was hardly anything in there. It felt like he had control of the game all throughout, and that's something I felt like Tua never truly had. I mean, I feel like Tua looked shaken, even though Tua was the more experienced guy. He has been there before. He's a champion. They brought him in last year during the championship to pretty much save them when Jalen Hurts wasn't performing well in the first half. They brought Tua in, and Tua essentially saved them in that game. But Tua in this game, I mean, he looked pretty much shaken the whole time around. I mean, he was completed 22 of his 34 passes. He threw for 295 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 2 interceptions. And he had a QBR of 21.5. So it just shows that Tua was struggling for the most part. It looked like the Clemson defense had him just in a fits, and he didn't really know how to get out of that. I think he threw an early pick 6, and he did respond after that pretty fast. But then it seemed like it was always like they were always trying to climb back in, or they were always fighting from a deficit, even though the game wasn't even that far out of reach. That's just the feel you got from watching the game. Like Alabama was just trying to keep pace, that they weren't really on equal footing, and that they were just trying to keep up with Clemson. And so when you're looking at this team, I mean, we're seeing that they had a lot of seniors that were on that team, but a lot of the most important guys like Trevor Lawrence or Justin Ross. I mean, Justin Ross had a day yesterday. I mean, you guys are probably going to see his highlight of a one-handed catch that he had that was pretty amazing. It was along the sideline. I mean, it was one of the best catches I've seen in a championship game. And I mean, he went for 6 receptions, 153 yards, and 1 touchdown. But you have guys like him and Trevor Lawrence that are going to be returning with the team. So this team is still going to have some talent to be dealt with for the next few years. And it becomes one of those things that now you have to start asking the question, just how good is Clemson? I mean, we have to really start thinking about it in terms of when we're comparing them to a program like Alabama and so on. And you even heard the pitch during the celebration yesterday where they kind of gave the Death Valley pitch, and you just start to wonder, you're like, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you want to go to Clemson if you're searching out championships, you want to win a championship? Because, I mean, there are 3 matchups against Alabama. They're 2-1. I mean, let's just be real here. They've beaten Nick Saban at his own game, and you can make a case in a lot of ways that the first time the two teams met up, that it could have gone either way in that one as well. That when Deshaun Watson and them first played them, it was one of those situations where you looked at it and you're like, okay, these teams aren't too far apart from each other. Like there isn't a world of a gap here between these two teams, and you can definitely see them playing each other down the line. And I mean, obviously it did come to fruition, but now you're sitting here wondering, like, are these the two dynasties that are going to be battling in the championship for the next few years to come? I mean, if you're essentially looking at how many years Trevor Lawrence has left to play college football, he has 3 years left. He even noted it last night during his post-game speech when they were asking how many more championships do you want to win. He was like, I mean, hopefully 3 more. Granted, he can leave college after 2 years, but when you're looking at it, if he has possibly 3 years that he could just go throughout his whole college career and rack up championships, where are the other teams like the Michigans and the Georgias and Ohio States? Where do all those teams fall in line? You gotta really start looking at it and start asking these questions, because there's a bracket that separates all these programs. Excuse me. And for a good amount of time, Alabama's always been seen as the best, and they are the best. I mean, 5 championships in the Nick Saban era, you definitely deserve that claim, and the amount of championships they've been to, you deserve that claim and that kind of accolade. But when you're looking at in terms of just how another team has kind of balanced the counterweight of power in that same era with Clemson and what they're doing, you got to look at it and be like, well, what other teams can really step up and put their mark on what this dynasty run is, and what other teams can put themselves in that conversation? Because it seems like at this point it's a 2-team race, and they're kind of getting away from the rest of the pack. I mean, Clemson didn't just beat out. I mean, they whooped Alabama. I don't know how much I can stress it. Tua accounted for Alabama's 2 turnovers, and I mean, Clemson, they just couldn't get anything they wanted at all last night. Like, it was Alabama couldn't get anything they wanted at all last night. When you looked at how many third downs both teams were able to convert, Clemson converted 60% of their 66% of their third downs. Alabama converted 30.7%. I mean, it was one of those situations where Clemson could just keep moving the ball up the field against that speedy Alabama team that everybody always just says is prepped and ready to go and can perform. It has pro players and all that stuff. But Clemson tore them apart. And you look at it and you're seeing a guy like Trevor Lawrence. I heard somebody say that if he was available to go in the draft, that he would be the number one pick today. That's how good he is. Sometimes I think that it's hard to illustrate how good these guys are when they're performing against college talent. But when you perform in the championship, a lot of times those guys you're playing against are the top tier of what's available to play. And when you shred them up like that, a lot of teams. I remember a few years ago when Cardale Jones came in and for Ohio State, he played like lights out. And everybody was like, oh yeah, Cardale Jones' draft stock is so high and everything like that. The next year, he didn't play as well, so his draft stock went down some. But after that championship game, Cardale Jones was just elevated in terms of what his draft perspective was and everything like that. So it's definitely a situation that it's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years and see the dynamic of college football and see if the balance of power kind of changes some with what Alabama and Clemson have, and see if anybody else is able to insert themselves into that conversation. But all right, guys, I'm gonna take my first break. This is KBR Sports, the best sports podcast of your 24-hour day. Now, guys, one thing I do want to do going into this break is I want to talk about my friends Fanatics and just kind of illustrate for you guys how big of a brand they are in terms of apparel and memorabilia, especially after this championship. I mean, I know a lot of Clemson fans are going to be looking to get different kinds of apparel, championship gear to celebrate the 2018-2019 season and to celebrate being the first team to be a 15-0 champion. And what better way to do that than to get all the gear that you want, to go to the leading apparel and memorabilia place where you can find all the items that you might need, whether it's a Clemson ring t-shirt, the whole nine, to find Dabo with the picture of him in his interview, all that. Go to Fanatics, guys. Fanatics will have all that available for you. Make sure you guys give a call to 954-507-6928 in order to also get the best prices on any kind of gear that you might be looking to get, especially after your team has won the championship. So guys, don't hesitate to give a call today. Make sure you go to Fanatics. They're the best brand in terms of sports apparel and the whole nine. They'll definitely take care of you. I wear Fanatics gear. A lot of my friends wear Fanatics gear, and they just never seem to disappoint. So make sure you guys go through Fanatics and make sure you get your stuff at the best prices. All right, guys, so wanted to jump in to talking about the playoff weekend, and we had a lot of games to go through. I mean, essentially we had about 4 games or so to talk about throughout the wild card round, and I wanted to touch on everything, but I don't know if I'll have the time to do so, and it seemed like I do have to kind of get it going with the time. So main thing I wanted to talk about in terms of from the wild card round, from what I saw, was the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, it was an interesting game to say the least in terms of what transpired between the Ravens and the Chargers, and it was one of those situations where I was watching the game. It was a very grueling game to watch. It was in terms of just the pace of the game, it was rough in a lot of instances. A lot of why I say it was so tough to watch is just because of the fact that, none of the teams were really able to move the ball in that game all too well. And I feel as though when watching from the Ravens perspective, and it's interesting to me that a lot of people were calling for Lamar Jackson to get benched, and they were asking the questions, so Lamar be finishing this game? Is it a situation where should they take Lamar out at halftime and all that? But I was going back and I was just looking through all the halftime stats. You get all the halftime sheets and data and stuff like that. And I'm looking through, I'm like, I know Lamar now, don't get me wrong, Lamar played bad. Lamar Jackson was bad. I mean, granted, he is the youngest rookie quarterback to start in a playoff game, and rookie quarterbacks historically are winless in playoff games. So this was no surprise or anything like that in terms of how this turned out. But when I was going back and I was looking through at all the games, I'm like, man, no quarterback played well in the first half, of any of these games. No quarterback. Honestly, none of the quarterbacks, even except for Andrew Luck, Andrew Luck was like the one outlier in terms of a guy who actually played well, that actually looked like he was a playoff tested quarterback and looked like he was comfortable and fully ready to perform on that day. Andrew Luck was the only guy. None of the quarterbacks throughout the wild card round looked good throughout the first half of any of those games. And all these guys that are getting credit for these wins, like Nick Foles or Dak Prescott and so on, these guys did not play well. They did not play great games by any means of the imagination. So then it's like when we're looking at a guy like Lamar Jackson, I'm seeing people say all these things like, oh, bench Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson should be benched. Lamar Jackson shouldn't be finishing the game. I'm just like, where was all this when Lamar Jackson brought you to the playoffs? It literally had me baffled at how many people I saw were calling for Lamar Jackson to get benched. And even at some point in the stadium, Ravens fans were booing. And I don't know if they were booing John Harbaugh for keeping Lamar Jackson in there, or they were booing Lamar Jackson himself. But when you looked at it, I see here's in terms of me, when I look at when I'm deciding, hey, should starting quarterback be benched for the backup, there are 3 questions I have to ask myself. And if these 3 questions are all positive answers, then I guess that kind of validates the decision if I decided to do it. And in terms of, this is for Joe Flacco. This is in the Joe Flacco instance. But will the backup increase my chances of winning the game? And to me, in that instance, no. Joe Flacco would not have increased the Ravens' chances of beating the Chargers, because it looked like, from watching the game, you saw Lamar Jackson, he had 7 sacks. He took 7 sacks. He took very unnecessary sacks, and you were watching the game and you're like, there were so many mistakes he was making that you saw the lack of pocket presence and awareness, and you saw that he was making turnovers that was just like, you have to secure the ball, you have to be much better in terms of ball protection and stuff like that, in terms of like his fumbles and then the interception he threw. He fumbled the ball 3 times, so that's definitely something that he has to get better with. But when you're talking about how he played in the totality and how Joe Flacco in contrast might have played, the Chargers pass rush, they have guys on that Chargers defensive line and that Chargers defense in general. They're not like Joey Bosa and so on, Melvin Ingram and all those guys. They're all quality players that are able to put pressure on a quarterback, and then they have that secondary that's able to lock up as well when you got guys like Derwin James and Cam Hayward and so on that are able to play at a high level. And it's like you're asking a lot of this rookie quarterback, obviously, to step up in that situation. And then when we're looking at the frame of putting Joe Flacco in there, the offense is entirely warped from what it last was with Joe Flacco. They've warped this offense into being Lamar Jackson's offense. So now you're saying you want to just thrust Joe Flacco in there and have a team that's been practicing and playing in preparation for Lamar Jackson being the quarterback for weeks. And they've won, they almost practically gone undefeated with Lamar Jackson at quarterback for weeks or 7 weeks. And now you're trying to make an impromptu move to change in the middle of a playoff game. And would that have increased their chances to win? For me, no. Joe Flacco didn't increase their chances to win during the regular season. How am I going to believe he's going to increase their chances to win in the playoffs? No, I just didn't see it. I don't see any justification behind it. I know a lot of people were criticizing Lamar Jackson's ability to throw the football, but evidently a throwing quarterback wasn't that effective during the regular season either, because they're almost about to miss the playoffs if Joe Flacco would have stayed as a starter. So what Lamar Jackson was doing, and Lamar Jackson almost brought them back. He finally got comfortable in the fourth quarter, and we saw just how easy it was for him in the fourth quarter, and just how he had the Chargers reeling. The Chargers couldn't wait for that game to end. They couldn't wait. It couldn't have ended soon enough for the Chargers. That's how close they were to blowing the game. So that's answer to question 1. Is, will it increase the chances of winning this game? No. That's a no for me. So some people might be different. If you have a different opinion, you leave it in the comment section. I want to know your opinion. Now, 2, is the short-term result worth the long-term consequences? And what I mean by that is, in the short term, yes, you might get a win, but and you also might put yourself in a better position to possibly win the game, or if depending on how you voted. But if you end up losing the game and you ended up putting Joe Flacco in there, 1, your whole coaching staff is going to get criticized for making the decision to bail on Lamar Jackson, and that decision in terms of how it looks in retrospect and how you don't give up on your starting quarterback. Sorry, guys. My throat is like, I don't know, it's been acting funny recently, so I have to keep clearing it. But in terms of how you view things with your quarterback, if you take the short term, even if you got a win is great, yeah, but just imagine the whole next week. The question is Lamar going to be the starter? Is Joe going to be the starter? And then if you continue to go with Joe as the starter, does it make sense to move on from Joe if Joe possibly goes on a playoff run and so on, wins the Super Bowl? But it's obvious that you were ready to move on from him when you benched him. So these are the kind of things that we're talking about when we're talking about short-term results in spite of long-term consequences. And then what does that do also in terms of how people view on the team Lamar Jackson? Lamar Jackson was working his way into being that leader role on the team, to being the figurehead of the team. Even though Joe Flacco is still there mentoring and giving advice and stuff like that, Lamar Jackson is at the head of the snake on that team. So what is that message does that send to your team if when the going gets tough, and obviously we all know Lamar Jackson's deficiencies, then you all of a sudden bail on him for the same guy that you benched because of his deficiencies? So what kind of message does that send to your team? And in those kind of moments, how are they going to rally around that young quarterback if they don't even believe that you believe in him as a head coach? So those are little things that you have to take into account when you're deciding what moves you're going to make in terms of how it affects your franchise in the short term and in the long term. Because, yeah, you might win the game, but even if you win the game, you still have all those issues. And then let alone let you lose the game. Let you make a decision like that, like changing the quarterback and then losing the game. Oh, you'll get butchered. You'll literally get killed. It's without a doubt, you'll get killed. So it's one of those things that you have to just take into all of those things into account. I think people just think it's an easy switch. Oh yeah, get him out of there, put the guy in. They think it's Madden, but no, there's so many things that go into it as well that you don't have to deal with in Madden that you deal with in the real life. So that's just question number 2. And then question number 3, just how would it affect my starter moving forward? And how would it affect Lamar Jackson moving forward? I mean, you'd have to assume it would kill his confidence, his ability to believe in himself, that in those pressure moments that he's the guy that you obviously stuck with. And after that game, I mean, you have to look at Lamar, and he obviously knows he didn't play a great game, but he also knows that, hey, I was able to make the plays in the fourth quarter to keep us within striking distance. I mean, they had the ball for a chance to go and win the game. On the last drive, they had the ball. He fumbled it, of course, and that's the fumble that they lost. But it's not like he didn't have them in position to possibly win that game. The Chargers are all on the sideline just watching the game intently because they knew we might blow this game. If this kid leads this comeback and they somehow win this, we blew it. Like that was a Chargers win without a doubt. And if Lamar Jackson would have led the Ravens down the field and scored, they would have entirely blew it. So looking at that, you sit back and you say, now with him having that experience and that confidence, he knows he can do it. He knows he can lead a team down the field because he did it that whole fourth quarter. The Ravens were essentially just without offense throughout the whole game. And then in that fourth quarter, it was like lightning in a bottle. Lamar Jackson was making exceptional plays, throws that I was just like, at first I'm like, why did you? Oh, okay. Kind of things. And it was really death-defying to watch him and see what kind of feats he was going to perform next. And so when you're seeing those kind of things take place, you got to see how that affects the maturation of the quarterback. And you got to realize Lamar Jackson is your long-term plan. You don't have any other guy, and Joe Flacco hasn't been that guy for years, since the last Super Bowl. Since he got his money, Joe Flacco has not been that guy. So sitting here waiting on the clock for him to be that guy, it doesn't seem like it's going to work out. So you got to move on and anticipate that the long-term plan is going to be what comes to fruition for you, which is Lamar Jackson. But all right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for the KBR Sports Podcast. It's been the best sports podcast of your 24-hour day. Appreciate everybody tuning into the podcast. And I want to make sure that obviously I'm trying to be more consistent with posting podcast episodes. Obviously, I noted earlier in the show with the break and everything that I took for vacation, but I definitely want to make sure that I am being a more consistent presence on here for you guys. And let me know if you guys, I'm having a lot of video ideas, and I did want to do a video on Carmelo. I've been saying this for like weeks now, but then I had an idea to do a video on Brandon Roy. And I know a lot of people know that guy, Brandon Roy. I mean, Brandon Roy was one of the nastiest guys in the league at the time of when he was at the height of his powers. And I've contemplated doing a video on both guys, but not totally sure. So if you guys don't mind, leave a comment. Let me know, who would you rather see a video on, Brandon Roy or Carmelo Anthony? I think those would be kind of interesting things, different angles to talk about, kind of how both their careers have played out up until this point, and what was it exactly that totally derailed their careers, or what major point in their career was the deciding turning point in how their careers have ended up where they are now. So guys, definitely make sure you leave a comment, and make sure you guys subscribe. I always appreciate those who subscribe. We continuously tune into the podcast, trying to grow the community here, of course, and have a growing community and niche here that I always appreciate from you guys, and it definitely means a lot for all the support. And also make sure you follow on Twitter at KBR_sports, as well as my own Twitter page at AbinBrendan. And I always appreciate all the support from you all, and definitely all the engagement that you guys have with the podcast. And definitely, guys, until next time, I'm out.